Since my 1-year-old was sleeping, I had to go in my master bedroom closet and just talk on the phone very quietly.
And so Trump's got to walk the line of somebody who's loyal enough to him, but who's not so far to the right that they're not going to win a general election in North Carolina.
I don't know. In this day and age, people don't really remember that reporters are humans, and it felt like a good opportunity to remind people of that.
All right, welcome on in to Tying It Together with Tim Boyum and Spectrum News 1 production. I'm Tim Boyum here as always with producer John McHugh. How are you, my friend?
Good. I thought we'd get a little bit of time to breathe after last week, but that apparently is not in the cards.
Yeah, so do you remember last summer? The debate was June 27th, and then a few weeks later, Trump got shot, Biden dropped out, and I was like, okay, so 2025, we're going to the beach, essentially.
Right. Yeah, it'll be cool. How it couldn't possibly get more chaotic.
No, especially on a weekend.
Oh yeah, it's but hey, these summer Sundays have been cursed.
Yeah, enter Thom Tillis. Actually, it started Saturday night with the vote on the floor, and then him dropping out of the race. You were actually out of town. I had a pork butt on the smoker. It's just kind of fitting.
Yeah, it is. I saw it. I got a push alert about it. I texted you, and then I put my phone on the charger and went outside for a couple hours.
Which is very smart.
It was a nice luxury to have.
Yeah.
And come back to reality.
Yeah, my phone was blowing up for hours on hours. So we were going to talk largely about the legislature and the session ending, which we will do, which was also crazy this year, kind of, even though not a lot got done.
Crazy in a weird way.
Yeah.
A lot could have gotten done. A lot didn't really get done. And what did and did not get done is an interesting window.
Yeah.
The dynamics down on Jones Street right now.
Yeah, and a lot we don't know about relationships and how things are going. So we thought we'd bring in two friends of a program. It's always a fun conversation. Lucille Sherman with Axios Raleigh and Colin Campbell, Capitol Bureau Chief over at WUNC Radio. We're going to talk about Tillis. We're going to talk about the legislature. Lucille's going to share some poignant, I thought, really conversation about that. She shared in Axios about a miscarriage that she had during an abortion debate a few years ago. So it's just a really great conversation. So away we go. All right, well, first of all, it's great to see the both of you alive and well. I had all intentions of only focusing on the legislature, and then Sunday happened. Lucille, I saw you were on the phone a lot Sunday?
I was on the phone a lot. Since my 1-year-old was sleeping, I had to go in my master bedroom closet and just talk on the phone very quietly because I tried sitting outside and I was getting eaten up by mosquitoes. So yeah, I was just in my closet for 3 hours yesterday.
So obviously the news we're talking about is Thom Tillis announcing he's out for U.S. Senate 2026. Just give people an insight of what that's like. Because for me, my phone started ping, 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 ping,
Yeah,
ping.
I really try not to be on social media on the weekends because I need to keep my sanity on some level. So I normally just don't check Twitter or whatever, but my phone starts blowing up with texts from editors and others being like, "Oh, did you see this? Are you going to do a story on it?" I guess it's time to drop everything I'm doing and start thinking about Thom Tillis and file a bunch of stories.
Which is just the dream of a Sunday.
It was sort of earth-shattering, but not earth-shattering. It was sort of time-stopping moment for me to realize that it was actually happening and he was announcing he wasn't running for re-election after sort of building out this war chest and running ads and everything. The thing that made me be on high alert earlier in the day, Sunday, rather than later, is that Mark Robinson, either Saturday night after Trump tweeted sort of threatening to primary Tillis, former Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson quote tweeted it and said something snarky about Tillis. And that made me oh, we should all be prepared for something to happen here. So I wasn't all that surprised by the time it all sort of unwound itself on Tuesday at 2 p.m. on Sunday.
This felt like a slow buildup, though, that this was always going to be possible.
Yeah, I mean, for all of his claiming he was going to run for re-election, I think most of us had a pretty strong sense that if Trump decided he wasn't happy with Tillis and he was going to endorse some kind of primary challenger, then Tillis was going to have to rethink whether or not he was going to run. I kind of assumed that wouldn't happen until you got to a point where there was a primary challenger running with a Trump endorsement, and then Tillis does his polling and sees whether it's a lost cause or not. But I think in this case, he came to that conclusion organically just based on sort of the choices that he had to make around this particular piece of legislation.
I guess I just didn't really think that there was any viable primary challenger for Tillis, and so it made it hard for me to conceptualize the idea that Trump would endorse someone other than him, because there isn't a clear sort of front runner, if that makes sense. I mean, there are a few people, that we're talking about and thinking about, but there's still no obvious front runner. So I think that's what made it sort of hard to really believe that there was a chance this could happen.
I just felt like no matter what, if he endorsed somebody, that person would be Thom Tillis. I think some people thought that maybe.
Well, as long as he stayed on the right side of Trump, and that was the challenge that Tillis was trying to walk of, could he sort of keep his independent streak on some level and still keep a good relationship with President Trump, so even if they disagreed, he wouldn't necessarily be facing a primary challenge. But I mean, the thing with a primary challenge, it doesn't have to be someone who's well-known or a political talent. Trump can endorse someone in a GOP primary. They can go from an unknown to the nominee in no time at all. I mean, look at Addison McDowell, the congressman from the Greensboro
Ted Budd in the Senate race.
Yeah, Ted Budd was a surprise. Yeah, it's
Mark Robinson got a Trump endorsement, didn't he?
Yep, they did.
Yeah, and so what's interesting now is where I think in the past, when you'd have a big figure like Tillis drop out of a race, you'd immediately see people jump up and say, I'm running. Instead, we're getting a ton of people coming in and say, I'm considering running. And what they really mean is, I'm talking to my friends who know Trump to see if there's any possibility that I might get that endorsement. So you've got current members of the congressional delegation who are making those announcements, but also like random members of the legislature. The labor commissioner, Luke Farley, put out sort of a cryptic statement that he was going to work with the president on finding a new candidate. And it all seems like everyone's just sort of sitting back and like, well, if you'd like to pick me, I'd like to be the candidate, but I'm going to wait until see who you pick first.
I feel like yesterday my day was in two parts. The first was trying to scoop that he was going to announce he wasn't running for re-election. And then once the press release came out where he announced it, the second half of my day and still into today is like people basically pitching themselves as a viable candidate to run against him, or to run in his place.
Maybe he should do a game show, since he's done one before, the Trump showed, with all these candidates.
I mean, Trump would be all over that.
Mr. President, we have an idea for you. That would be kind of fun, right?
They can all go down to Mar-a-Lago for a week and compete. Yeah.
It'd be like Hunger Games.
Yeah, there's going to be some stabbing behind the back, I think.
That would be fun. Let's not do that.
So this is dangerous because we're taping this on Monday. It's going to drop Wednesday. But, I mean, some people are saying Laura Trump, she lives in Florida, has young kids. She passed in 2022 because of that, essentially the same thing. But they say she's seriously considering it. I'm skeptical of that. You're shaking your head, Lucille, yes?
Yeah, I'm skeptical, mostly just because of folks that I've talked to. Like, I think there are other people that could run, and I think it seems like it's probably hers if she wants it. But, I mean, the stories that I've been reading are, one source stories saying that she's seriously considering it, and I just haven't gotten the same level of intel. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm right. It's just that I may not have the same intel some of these other folks do. But I also think Whatley is a super high up there contender. Like, to me, he seems more of a legitimate possibility than Laura Trump.
My sources say he's been sniffing around this for some time. He's RNC chairman, was the NC GOP chair. He's driven all over the state and would be able to raise money, too.
Yeah, I mean, to have that kind of profile, I think, would be something. I mean, the challenge for Trump and whoever he endorses, whether it's Whatley or Laura Trump or one of the members of Congress, is that this is not like the congressional races he's endorsed in before, where it's kind of a shoe-in for whoever the Republicans have coming out of their primary. This is going to be a really tough race. And I think it's tougher for Republicans by not having the incumbency of Thom Tillis in there to sort of give them some initial boost, particularly if Governor Roy Cooper decides he wants to jump in this race. This is going to be a tough year for Republicans.
And they're going to move. That candidate will inevitably be to the right.
Yeah, and so Trump's got to walk the line of like somebody who's loyal enough to him, but who's not so far to the right that they're not going to win a general election in North Carolina.
So Pat Harrigan's a freshman member of Congress. He seems to have gotten to the list, the higher part of the list among those members of Congress.
I totally agree. Yeah, I think the 1 and 2, as far as I'm concerned, are not and Harrigan, or Harrigan and then not. So it seems like Whatley, Laura Trump, Pat Harrigan, Brad Knott.
Yeah, and I think Pat Harrigan has really done a good job in just a few months in Congress of sort of raising his profile. He seems like he's doing cable news interviews all the time. He's got a military background. He's young. He's tall. He's sort of your traditional young Republican,
Kendall Republican,
central casting type thing.
He's not from North Carolina, so I don't know how much that will be hard for him. But it's also like pretty much the entire class of freshman Republican congressmen are sort of in the mix on this too.
And Addison McDowell's brother, who knows what role he might play, Chase McDowell.
Yeah, some of these guys are in Congress because they got a Trump endorsement just last year, essentially. Yeah. So they're hoping that perhaps they can do that again and get another Trump endorsement and win.
So Chase McDowell is like probably one of the closest people to the Trump administration in North Carolina. So I think he will absolutely be a major player in this.
Yeah, whoever gets that hunting trip out with Don Jr.
Yeah, keep an eye on who's traveling out to Hyde County to the hunting lodge or whatever.
So if I'm Roy Cooper, and I'm still deciding at this point, it feels like if you're going to jump in and want to run now's the time, right? I mean, we don't know, but it would have been harder. You were saying it might have been harder against Thom Tillis. I mean, does this...
Now it's an open seat. I mean, I think that to the extent that Cooper was waiting around, this will be a point in favor of he should run. What's interesting to me is that he hasn't made a decision at this point. I mean, there was reporting a couple months ago that said, he was going to make his announcement in June. Well, now we're at the end of June, and it's looking like maybe July. But the longer he waits, particularly if the answer ends up being no, then it becomes this wild card of all these other Democrats. Currently, only former Congressman Wiley Nichols officially in this race, and I think if Cooper takes a pass, a bunch of others jump in there, but they're going to be jumping in kind of late in the game, although not as late in the game as they thought they would be when they thought they'd run against Thom Tillis, who's been raising money since the last time he was elected.
Yeah, my first thought was like, okay, well now there are a lot more people that could win. There are a lot more Democrats that could win this seat because sort of the mindset, I think, was only Roy Cooper can beat Thom Tillis. I don't know if that's necessarily true, but like...
A lot of people were saying that.
Yeah. He certainly had a leg up on somebody like Wiley Nichols. But now my thought was like, well, maybe he won't run if he doesn't really want to run. He doesn't feel like as obligated to run as because he's the only person who can beat Thom Tillis. But then again, this might be a way easier race for him to be able to jump in. It does feel like it sets his timeline. It feels like it might be a lot longer before he announces.
Yeah, and Cooper is very cautious. I mean, this is a guy who spent 16 years as Attorney General because he was waiting for the right moment to run for governor.
Yeah,
never forget.
So, I mean,
he's like 8 years I asked him that question, I think.
Yeah, so I mean, he's going to really run the calculus, run the numbers, and see whether he thinks he can win. I mean, he's also never lost a race, I don't think. So that's another thing. He doesn't want to go out on a big loss that then, solidifies Donald Trump's Senate majority. I think
what's interesting to your point about save democracy and that push to run, I really think that was this pitch that would have gotten him into the race. I think deep down he probably doesn't want to run.
I totally agree with that.
But he's going to feel guilted into running almost to save the union.
Yeah. I also am like, which party is going to put their main person, their front runner forward first? Like, is Trump going to endorse before Cooper announces, or is Cooper going to get in before Trump announces? Like, who's going to go first? Because whoever goes first will have a better shot at sort of like positioning the right candidate to run against whoever the front runner of the opposing party is.
And Cooper and his team are famous for waiting because they want to raise a ton of money and have this big splash and get everybody else out. Jeff Jackson's the other one that heat coming up. But everything I've heard, the tea leaves, is that I just became Attorney General and I don't want to look like I'm jumping into something else.
Yeah.
Is that fair?
Yeah, I've heard that too. I was talking to somebody this morning who feels like Jeff Jackson is a top contender. And I was like, wouldn't the political ads write themselves, though, that he's sort of like a ladder climber, that he's just sort of in it, he's swampy, the things that we've heard in political ads over the last few years. But I don't know if voters... if that will really resonate with voters. I guess it depends who he'd be running against.
And maybe he would be brought into it by saying, we need you to save this country too.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of those guys seem to be very, the ego pitch really does it for these people of like, only you can save democracy.
All I know is that consultants are making a lot of phone calls to try to get some clients right now. We may have this may be like that, the first year that when Ted ran and won in his House seat where we had 16 people in the primary, I think.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
I don't see that happening. Like, I feel like Trump will endorse.
I think that
if that's the case, I think you're right. The primary may be over as soon as it's announced whoever's running as Trump.
Yeah, and when is that going to happen?
Yeah, I mean, I think the only way you get 16 people is if Trump doesn't endorse it, he stays out of it and decides that he wants to watch the reality show from afar of a contested Republican primary and let the voters decide. But
it already feels like he's gotten out of in front of it by saying, I'm talking with potential candidates. Like, to me, that signaled, I'm assuming that he'll endorse before the primary, but
yeah. And I think you're right about this. Whether Laura or Whatley, I think that happens in conjunction with an announcement, probably.
Mm-hmm.
And then if not, then this might drag out for a while. And he likes things to, play out. So we'll have to see. All right, back to what we were originally going to talk about on this podcast, the General Assembly. Not super productive, right?
yeah, I mean, this is one of those years where really there's no big headline of something they accomplished. I mean, 2 years ago, we were talking about Medicaid expansion. We were talking about abortion. This year, I guess Helene recovery funding is the only major thing they can point to as
But that
accomplishment
had
at
to
this
get
point.
done.
Yeah, and otherwise you'd have, people at the western end of the stage. They're already going to have
got really close to not having, really dangerously
that
close
really
to
came
not,
down the wire.
Yeah.
Like, last few hours that they were in session, they finally got a deal on that bill.
Yeah, and I'm shocked, honestly, because they were in disagreement over so many other things. But they did get, some culture war issues across the finish line. But yeah, Helene is sort of their big thing. It feels like, in maybe immigration too.
Yeah, and those, of course, you've got to get the veto override through, and that's not a done deal with the current dynamics over there. Democrats seem like they're fairly united for now. So this might be one of those situations where the most controversial bills from this past session are just going to loom for months and months, where they're waiting to see if enough Democrats are absent, they can take the vote and have a successful override. Or these may not get through either. So it's we're not nearly anywhere close to being done with all of this at this point, and they're going to be back a lot, even though they can't agree on exactly when they want to be back.
So I want to circle back to that in a minute, but you mentioned the veto overrides. So we've all been waiting to see how the Stein Republican legislature relationship is going to go. Then we said, well, wait until something, happens. And it's happened, right? So we had these vetoes and overrides. And there's been some shots back and forth on social media, but it still feels different.
Mild.
Than
It feels
Cooper.
pretty mild.
Like, it's like, I'm going to throw some lobs at you, you throw them back at me, but it's okay. Is that fair?
Yeah, and the veto messages are not quite as pointed. I mean, he clearly lays out why he thinks that these bills are bad policy, but it's not as, sort of draconian rhetoric as you saw from some of the Cooper vetoes that are like, this is bad faith policymaking by Phil Berger or whatever. You're not getting that anymore.
Another reporter, Rose Hoban at North Carolina Health News, made the point recently that, like, Stein got to watch sort of how Governor Roy Cooper interacted with the legislature, and it probably felt like a norm that they were at each other's throats. So Stein has sort of gotten to sit back and watch and maybe think about how he might handle it. Cooper was sort of a guinea pig, I feel like, in a lot of ways. He came right after McCrory. There were some explosive culture war issues happening, like right as
From
he took
day one.
office. Yeah.
Before day one.
Before day one. And so I wonder if that's part of it, that Stein has sort of had the chance to sit back and think about how he might approach it, and he's decided a different approach might work better.
So something that is icier, the relationship between the House and the Senate right now, maybe?
Spicy, that's what I like to call
Icy.
it.
Spicy and icy.
It's like even with the vetoes, I think the most contentious relationship is between House and Senate leaders.
So there's new leadership in the House, and we were all waiting to see what would happen. I think people thought they might be more aligned than Tim Moore was, even at least from a philosophical perspective.
Agreed.
What is going on? Or maybe I should say what isn't going on, which is a lot.
I mean, what's interesting is they just don't seem to be talking. I mean, I've been through this budget process before where they don't get their act together by June 30th. That is not in any way new. But in the past, it felt like there were, you go to the interview Berger and Tim Moore at the time, and they would say that they're meeting, they're talking, they're just slow to make progress. They'll get there eventually. This year, they don't sound that optimistic about getting there eventually, and it doesn't seem like they're even having meetings or talking. It's just sort of this breakdown in communications where they're sort of lobbing bombs at each other through the press corps, through social media, but not really building any sort of relationship. I mean, Berger and Moore didn't get along a lot, but they worked together long enough that they'd built up some level of relationship, and I just don't know that relationship's there with Destin Hall.
Yeah, I don't know that there's like, it seems like the chambers are at odds, but I don't know if Berger and Destin are necessarily at odds. Maybe they just don't have like the same relationship Moore and Berger had. I mean, they had years and years to build a rapport. To me, it's like, yeah, it doesn't feel like the governor is the enemy of the legislature this year. It feels like the chambers are each other's enemies, which sort of creates a completely different dynamic. Like the legislature felt sort of united around Cooper being the enemy for years, and I feel like that's changed this year. And then it also feels like the dynamic of the Senate Republican caucus and the House Republican caucus are different. Like in the last few weeks, it almost felt like the House Republican caucus was in lockstep on a lot of issues, which you don't really think of the House being in lockstep on anything. Yeah, it's very unruly. But if you think about sort of the issues that were in front of them, like shrimp trawling in lockstep, the budget in lockstep, those sort of big issues that matter in a fight in positioning themselves sort of to come out on top in an argument with the Senate, they were lockstep. And then meanwhile, Senate Republicans, there have been sort of a handful of detractors that have sort of more openly opposed Berger or expressed frustration with him. We saw Senator Bobby Hoenig sort of express extreme frustration over the Senate's advancement of the shrimp trawling ban.
He said he was ashamed to be a lawmaker.
Mm-hmm. He said a lot of things. And then a few weeks ago, I think shortly after the House budget came out, Senator Vicky Sawyer was on her podcast sort of almost positioning as on team House budget versus the Senate's budget. So I think we've just seen a little bit more breakage almost with the Senate Republican caucus, and that is really shocking to see.
And I think you get more stubbornness out of Senate Leader Phil Berger. One, he's been in this position for a while, so he is arguably the most powerful politician in the state. But I think the looming primary challenge has sort of changed the equation for him with the Rockingham Sheriff Sam Page mounting a pretty serious primary challenge. I think that's forced him to sort of push more of the culture wars issues that do well in Republican primaries. He also, even on these things like shrimp, I mean, the weirdest scene of this was Sheriff Page down there in his like cowboy sheriff hat, riling up the shrimp community that was down there to oppose this bill, sort of to make hay of this for his campaign. Even though Rockingham County is 3 or 4 hours from the coast, I don't think there's any shrimpers that live in that district.
Yeah,
they buy shrimp though. Come on.
Yeah.
Yeah, they buy shrimp, I guess. But
yes, he was there in his cowboy hat. One of his folks tried to give me a pin or a button. I was like, no, I'm good, thank you. But so to that point, is that played a role, though, this primary challenge? We've seen him roll out these endorsements like 18 months before an election.
If you look at his social media, it's like former Eden police chief so-and-so is endorsing him. I mean, and then you're also, I'm starting to see the drip of negative headlines about Sam Page and controversies that were, he was involved in 10 or 15 years ago. So this, I mean, the Berger political operation, as much as they'll say that they don't think he's a, serious threat to Berger's political future, they're definitely taking it seriously.
Well, I just wonder if it did have some impact on big things like the tax triggers. Like in the past, those differences that they had, you might often find that they would find a way to find the middle between the two sides. And they're just really dug in on.
Yeah, it's hard for me to tell whether it's about the tax triggers being sort of like the Republican legislature's legacy and its 14 or 15 years of control, or if it's sort of related to the primary. To me, it feels like, Phil Berger sort of says that the House budget is going back on an already agreed upon deal. So clearly he feels very strongly, because he was so central in negotiating and creating this tax cut system that we have in place. And so I don't know, I almost wonder if he feels like a sense of betrayal that the House is sort of walking that back, or even proposing to walk that back. And then that's what I've heard, when we're talking about budget negotiations. I think there's almost neither side is willing to have even a conversation, or at least one side in this, and I'm not sure which, is not even willing to have a conversation because they think either the tax triggers should change or shouldn't.
And no gambling or marijuana so far.
Yeah, that's been another interesting one, although there has been the controversy over hemp. I mean,
yeah.
Lucille had the story about the Senate's bill basically taking down John Bell, the House Rules Chairman's hemp business. So I really thought maybe hemp would move this session because it wasn't getting tied in with medical marijuana as it has in a few past years. But now we have these two competing hemp bills and people with very strong opinions and personal connections to them.
So where are we going the rest of this year? They couldn't agree on an adjournment resolution, so they're going to just keep coming back once a month? And
so it seems like the House is likely to come back in 2 weeks, and I guess they'll probably take up an override vote or two then. But I think it feels like overrides are what they're sort of going to deal with first, especially on like immigration.
If they have the votes, I mean, I think part of their scheduling challenges is figuring out who's available when to get all the Republicans in the room.
And the gun one is really in doubt.
Yeah, because
right?
because they had 2 House Republicans vote against the gun one. But even the last week of June, we generally know we're going to be in session. We generally know there's potential for veto overrides, and neither chamber can move on those because the Senate was down 3 or 4 Republicans, the House was down at least 5 or 6 Republicans, and so there's I think a big open question of like, when do you get everybody in the room when you need them for the rest of the year?
Yeah, feels like it's going to be complicated. But I mean, next year, whenever everybody's dealing with primaries and the general election will be even more complicated. So I feel like in previous years, remind me, Colin, they've left veto overrides on the table that they know they haven't been able to deal with,
the
right?
veto garage.
Yeah.
Speaking of Thom Tillis.
Yeah, I mean, they'll just stay on the calendar day after day after day for months and months.
But some of them they've completely left on the table and never taken up in recent years, right?
Yeah, there's some that they never really scheduled, particularly when they thought that they didn't have the votes. I mean, the last 2 years when they had a veto-proof majority, they just went ahead and rocked and rolled and got them through. But
yeah, I've been wondering if bills like concealed carry might just sort of hang out in the veto garage and never reappear. But
boy, that'll make some on the right very, very mad.
yeah.
And that's Senator Berger, because they've been going to him to try to get that bill passed. So a budget. We don't have a budget. They can't get mini budgets. You mentioned there's elections next year. Are we really going to go through this at least 2025 and not have raises and whatnot?
I suspect we'll get at some point in the coming months at least some kind of deal on a mini budget. They seemed like they were at least moving that direction the last week of session and didn't quite get it across the finish line. So I think some degree of raises will be in there. I mean, there's some of the sort of must-do things. So you've got to increase the amount of funding for Medicaid every year. You've got to increase funding for schools, enrollment growth at universities and K-12. So a lot of those are things they agree they've got to get done. It's just a question of what else they do along with that. And some of that is recognizing, I think what happened the last week of session was both the House and Senate were putting a lot of extra stuff in there that wasn't necessarily the must-do, but they were recognizing that a budget agreement on the whole budget was so far away, they wanted to get at least a few of the other things they wanted into the mini-budget bill, and that sort of bogged it down.
So they disagreed on the must-do items, and disagreeing on the must-do items is sort of...
Because that's what's new to me. I mean, we've been through these budget cycles before where it takes a long time for the House and Senate to come together. But in the past, mini budgets were not a particularly heavy lift. And this year, even that seems too hard for them.
Well, they got to wait for the big, beautiful bill, too, to see what happens with that. Right?
Yeah, I mean, that could create a mess. I mean, the thing of this session was every time you'd ask Republicans, like, cuts coming from the federal level, how do you handle it at the state level? And their attitude was sort of like, well, we'll deal with it when it gets here, but we haven't seen anything yet that we absolutely have to deal with right now. But particularly once if the mega bill passes and it has these Medicaid cuts, which is what, triggered this whole thing with Thom Tillis that we were discussing earlier, that puts the state in a hard position of Medicaid expansion automatically goes away unless the state puts a bunch of money behind it, but the state probably doesn't have that kind of money. So what policy comes out of that? I mean, these are all things that could trigger lawmakers to be back in session for a few
and
days
impact next year's elections.
Well, and to me, the thing that was super interesting, I know a lot of interesting things happened this weekend, but Senate Leader Phil Berger putting out a statement in support of the big, beautiful bill and saying, we'll work through what we need to work through, sort of made me raise my eyebrows, because I'm like, does that mean you're willing to adjust sort of something in the state budget so that all of these people don't fall off of Medicaid?
It has to, right? I mean, he was the single force behind the reversal of it actually happening. I mean, it happened, there was the sheriff way out in Western North Carolina. But I mean, he was the person they needed to change their mind. And after
it wouldn't have happened without him.
Yes.
No way.
That's why I feel like he is, but then where does that come from?
Yeah, and also, like, how much does that factor into how he views his legacy? Like, is expansion part of his legacy in his mind, or is it just tax triggers? What is it?
But I don't know if you on social media are seeing from conservatives, they're all saying, I told you so, and I don't know when there might be a push to not fund it.
Yeah, and it was interesting. In Tillis' speech on the floor the other day, he basically said, when I was House Speaker, we passed a bill to say, we're not going to expand Medicaid, in part because I was worried this very thing would happen, that the federal government sort of for whatever reason goes back on its promise, and then you've given health care to a lot of people and then you take it away. In his mind, it would be better not to have given it to them in the first place than to give people something nice and then 2 years later say, just kidding, you don't get health care anymore.
Yeah, but there was sort of a feeling in the legislature that everything would be fine. I think that's why Phil Berger came around, is that like, we don't foresee any issues with this going forward, except now there is. And
Which is wild.
I wonder if this totally changes the calculation with budget negotiations between the chambers, though, because now there's something else that they might really have to get done. Now, I don't know how strongly either the House Speaker or the Senate leader feel about doing something on Medicaid, but like I feel like that could force them to both come to the table.
And this 4th of July break in the next few weeks, you could argue it was really just needed.
Oh, God. Yeah.
Something.
Yeah, definitely.
Besides for y'all personally.
I mean, last week was a heat wave in Raleigh, but it was also, I mean, the air conditioning broke down in the legislative building for a while. Tempers were running high. It's to everyone's benefit to take a few weeks away from that place and go vacation, go think about something other than a budget, and maybe they'll be in a better position to do something whenever they do come back.
I do want to ask you, because you were so brave and you wrote for Axios about your miscarriage and how it transformed. Can you tell our audience just a little bit about that and where that came from that you wanted to write it? Because I just thought it was so brave.
Yeah. So in 2023, I broke the news that Representative Tricia Cotham was going to switch parties and become a Republican, which sort of gave way for abortion restrictions to be passed in the legislature. And I think I broke that story at the beginning of April, and then I think around the last weekend of April, it was the weekend of my 27th birthday party, I think, I found out I was having a miscarriage. And I was sort of like, okay, I need to unplug and step back. But then Senate Republicans, or I think just Republicans in the legislature, rolled out an abortion bill. And I was sitting in the press conference, like, it was such a strange feeling, because it's not like I was considering having an abortion or anything in that realm, but I was experiencing something really similar. And so people talking about it, it was just a very confusing feeling. Like, it wasn't directly related to my experience, but it was close enough that I felt very sensitive about it. And people said all kinds of things in the weeks of that bill sort of advancing. I didn't really feel like I wanted to even cover it. It was like one of the most important pieces of legislation that was moving through the legislature in a long time. And so I always knew that I wanted to write about it, because I think that people feel like reporters aren't humans with real experiences that are super painful and make it hard to do our jobs. And the other thing that, like, this seems sort of ironic, but like, I actually could not bring myself to feel anything about what should or should not happen with that bill. You know, I think people think reporters have strong opinions about every single piece of legislation that moves because they're covering them so closely, and they secretly have something in mind that they want to happen or don't want to happen. And I was too busy with my own stuff to think about any of that. And I feel like that's so important. Like, I have my own things going on. I'm not just like a biased reporter sort of approaching it with my own agenda. I was experiencing a miscarriage, listening to people talk about things very, very close to what I was experiencing. And it made me a better reporter, because I thought this doesn't matter. Like, what matters is people's individual experiences, and not sort of the state of play in terms of politics and who's going to vote which way and how they're messaging it and how it'll play in the election. It just changed everything about how I think about reporting. And so I felt like I needed to write about it because, like, I don't know, in this day and age, people don't really remember that reporters are humans. And it felt like a good opportunity to remind people of that, and also to be like, yeah, I changed as a reporter, and I think it was for the better.
Well, it was really brave. I appreciate it. Thanks for sharing it today. And there's a good, happy ending to this too, right? You got a little one at home right now.
Yeah, I have a 16-month-old. He's crazy. He's like running around. He's super intense. And so it feels like almost before I had a miscarriage, I was a completely different reporter. Like, I was constantly on the phone all the time till 10 p.m. It's the way I broke that Tricia Cotham story. And then after that, I was like, yeah, I just don't think this matters enough.
Yeah, it's not worth like spending that much of your time. I mean, I really feel like, I mean, all three of us have kids, and that really changes you as a journalist, because you realize there's more to life than working 60 hours a week chasing down sources. And, I feel like we're better reporters for it just because we recognize that life is not just politics.
Yeah, I think some people are frustrated by the fact that I've stepped back a little bit or act like people have sort of made comments to me that I'm like basically like a lazy reporter, not as good of a reporter now. And that's astonishing because I think that like the more experiences we have as reporters makes us better at reporting.
I also think that in this era especially where AI is going to take over and do a lot more, but, putting out data and facts and stuff like that, context is going to be more important than ever.
Yeah.
And you're able to provide a different kind of context, not your opinion, but perspective.
Yeah. Like, have you guys think about sitting in the press conference where they're announcing the abortion bill. They're talking about like exceptions for life of the mother. And I was like, am I going to get an exception? Like if this passes and I'm still experiencing a miscarriage, like, and my life is at risk, am I going to get an exception? Or like if this pregnancy sort of continues on, like, will this apply to me? And I wish that politicians spent more time thinking about their words because there are people in the room that are being affected by what they're saying directly, and sometimes they come off so insensitive.
Yeah, a lot of people in politics, like there's some that are really at the right reasons and others that treat it like a game. And as a journalist, you get necessarily sort of called them out for that publicly, a lot of times directly, but like it's frustrating to see that where it's just like you're here to score political points and you don't care how it affects people. And then there are other folks in politics who really do care about the people that are impacting and understand it, but some of them don't.
It was almost easier for me to think about covering politics as a game before I had a miscarriage. Like it feels like a game of chess. There are pieces that need to be moved around. It's a puzzle. It feels less emotional to cover politics that way, and that's why I enjoyed it. But my experience sort of made me remember that this isn't a game. This shouldn't be a game. And like I can cover these things as an actual human and not just someone like looking at a board.
And you report better because of it. I'm telling you, when I started doing this politically in like 2002, 3, and 4, I got into it because I was asked to cover it for a while. And I really fell into love with it because I love sports and it felt like sports.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But the longer I live here now, 23 and a half years, I love this state and I have kids here and I care about these issues.
Yeah.
And so those are two totally different things. And so, yeah, I care less about the sport of it. It's interesting every once in a while. And we talked about it even with this race, the Senate race at the beginning. But these issues matter, and I find myself going, and you do this with the small town stuff, going out in the communities more and talking to the people rather than just the institutions.
And what you find a lot of times is the issues that are top of mind for a mayor of a small town somewhere in North Carolina. It's completely different than what's consuming the legislative building. I mean, every time you go anywhere, big city to small city, they're talking about affordable housing. Affordable housing legislation got like barely a mention this year at the legislature.
One thing just as a positive thing about covering the state legislature, I will say the thing that makes it so much easier for me before that happened to me and now is that like I get to be close with all of these people. Like I know the ages of their kids and their kids' names and what sports they play and what they did this weekend. And the human connection of that isn't shown as often, but that's the part of covering the legislature that I spend the most time doing anyway. And it's the part that makes it much more refreshing and easier to do.
Yeah. We appreciate what you do. Appreciate you both. Thank you so much. It was a good conversation. And let's hope we have some Sundays this summer where we don't have to work.
Yeah, here's hoping. If you're thinking about dropping out of an election, please wait till Monday.
Or just please give us the scoop. Thanks.